Well, howdy doody, and welcome back to my venture across the United States, where I visit each state and cover some of the urban legends and local mythology present in the area. We're passing through the United States in alphabetical order as we go along this journey, so make sure you go ahead and check if your state has already been covered, and if not, subscribe and turn on those alerts so that you don't miss it when we do. Today we're visiting Massachusetts, the Bay State. To me, Massachusetts is most notable for its rich history and old age relative to the rest of the United States, and trust me, this does lend itself to having a bit more interesting folklore, and perhaps even a few more ghosts and ghouls running around. With this in mind, come with me today, and let's see what kind of folklore we find in the old forests, cities, and subways of my current home state. Number 1 are Pukwudgies. Now in Massachusetts, there are bears, snakes, and plenty of less credible critters running around like Bigfoot, but none of these creatures garner the fear that a Pukwudgie casts over the region. All over the world, you can find tales of small humans, and Pukwudgies fall into this category in Massachusetts, with their stories dating back to times before Europeans ever ventured to the Americas, and these creatures are prevalent in the Wampanoag folklore because of that. The Pukwudgie can be thought of as an analog to a troll, standing at about 2 to 3 feet in height, with gray skin and large ears, nose, and fingers. Some tales say the Pukwudgie even has skin that glows. In terms of their characterization, these little people aren't very friendly. At best, they're characterized as being mischievous. At worst, they supposedly look to unalive folks that wander too close to their territory, and native folklore states that they've gone so far as to kidnap children and burn down villages. These little critters supposedly have magical abilities too. They can appear to the naked eye if they wish, but they can also become invisible. They can also demonstrate features like those of the skinwalker, taking on an animal's appearance. They can cast magical, poisonous arrows, supposedly at least. And perhaps the most scary ability they possess is the ability of a Pukwudgie to control the souls of individuals they've slain, with these tall, dark figures being referred to as the Taipei Wonkas, and are analogous to shadow people in modern folklore. They also control lights in the woods, which match the European folklore of the will-o'-the-wisp, which can lure new victims into the woods and to their demise. In modern day, a lot of the sightings of Pukwudgies in Massachusetts occur in the Freetown State Forest. One famous experience is that of seeing orbs at night leading hikers off-trail and towards the edge of a 100-foot cliff, overlooking a local quarry in the state forest. This phenomenon has been used to explain several unexplained passings at this ledge by people who demonstrated no previous signs of mental distress. Regarding modern sightings of the Pukwudgie, there are a couple in Massachusetts that are pretty creepy. One occurred in Freetown, Massachusetts. A woman named Joanne was walking her dog in the Freetown State Forest when suddenly her pooch got scared and wandered off into the woods, before going prone, laying on leaves. Joanne questioned what the dog was doing, only to look ahead into the forest and see a small troll-like person standing on a rock with no clothing on. Funny enough, this small individual was also supposedly very fat, so fat that its stomach obscured its nether regions. The little man apparently watched Joanne for quite some time, and she froze, staring at it, until the dog she was with leapt into the air and pulled Joanne rapidly back onto the trail. Another sighting occurred to the west of Boston in Framingham, Mass., when a man named Tim was lured into the woods by a ball of light. It kept disappearing and reappearing over and over until Tim realized he'd traveled about 30 feet off of a path. And when he made it back to the path, he saw a 2-foot-tall man standing on the trail. And Tim actually did something pretty smart and rational here. He looked at the man, he looked the other way, and he took off running from it. Supposedly, Tim looked back as he was running, though, and saw the little man running off into the woods with a limp, but otherwise running like a human, according to him. Number 2 is Dungeon Rock Cave. Now I love folklore, but what I love more than serious folklore is silly folklore, and Dungeon Rock Cave is certainly part of the latter variety. This all takes in Lynn, Massachusetts, a suburb to the northeast of Boston with quite the reputation. I'll leave it at that. There are woods in the suburb, known as the Lynn Woods, and in those woods, among a rock formation, is a cave known as Dungeon Rock Cave, where the events of this story take place. You can go see it for yourself if you want to, and my understanding is the cave entrance is still occasionally open to tourists. In short, as the story goes, in the mid-1600s, Thomas Vail was a pirate in New England, and Thomas was apparently seen, alongside a few fellow pirates, carrying a treasure chest around the area and purchasing digging tools. And these pirates were spending a whole lot of time in the caves and the modern Lynn woods when an earthquake hit New England in 1638, collapsing the cave and unaliving Thomas and the crew, burying him and his treasure, thus kicking off the legend of Dungeon Rock Cave. Now in 1852, over 200 years later, this legend reinvigorated itself when a man named Hiram Marble bought the land, built a house, and moved his family to the area. Hiram was a spiritualist, and supposedly, under the direction of the deceased pirate, Thomas Vale, he began digging up the collapsed cave to find the buried treasure after multiple seances directed him toward this goal. Now, Hiram and his son used dynamite and all other types of digging equipment to try and find this treasure, but never did successfully find it before their deaths. Today, as I said, you can still visit this cave in Lynn Woods. It's open a few hours a day, and there's a sign to direct you to it in the park. There you can go down some wooden steps to the bottom of the cave and take a look around, thinking about whether there might be some pirate's booty hidden in the walls of the cavern. Number 3 is Boston's Vanishing Men conspiracy. Now, this is more of a myth and legend, and certainly less of the supernatural variety than we're used to, but this myth fits the profile of the conspiracy tier smiley-face killer urban legend. In short, victims of this crime are typically well-to-do young males attending one of the many prestigious universities in the Boston area, and as the story goes, the killer picks his victims as they are making their way home from a night out, pushing them into a body of water where they carry the risk of drowning in the waterways of Boston. This myth is sort of obscure, but is frequently perpetuated on Reddit and occasionally by news stories detailing it. Now, these drownings themselves are very real. Since 2007, I was able to find at least 12 college-age males that have disappeared after a night out, in a fashion fitting this description, with most of these males ending up in a body of water, deceased, usually the Charles River or the Boston Harbor, but also nearby bodies of water like beaches up and down the coast and local reservoirs in the Boston area. This legend is actually so pervasive in the college community in Boston that I myself was warned of becoming one of Boston's vanishing men by fellow graduate students and undergraduates that I taught. Most of these deaths occurred during the winter, and this is where the skepticism of the urban legend comes into play. People are skeptical because, of course, drunken misadventure increases the odds of one falling into a body of water. Add to it that the majority of folks in these cases fell into the water in the winter, which would lead to fatalities fitting this profile. When bodies come into contact with cold air or water, for the record, the body elicits something called cold shock response. This is a gasp reflex that results in inhalation. And if the head goes below water, this would cause someone to inadvertently breathe in water, resulting in drowning. Additionally, cold water carries the risk of decreased blood flow and hypothermia, all of which could decrease one's odds of getting out of a body of water successfully if they did fall in. Now, this widespread skepticism, similar to my own, doesn't decrease the prevalence of this myth in the area, and folks go so far as to attribute deaths in the northern Merrimack River, in Lowell, and New Hampshire to the supposed killer as well. At number 4, we have the Black Flash. At the very tip of Cape Cod, a peninsula on the eastern side of Massachusetts which juts out into the Atlantic Ocean, is Provincetown. Provincetown is well known as a summer resort town with a bustling population of 60,000 in the summer, which dwindles to under 4,000 in the winter, creating a stark contrast in its liveliness throughout the year, which perhaps fosters the creepy creature or event or whatever you call it that has come to be known as Provincetown's Black Flash. In 1939, a phenomenon began to occur in Provincetown where children would come home crying, complaining of a big black growling monster which would scare them before running off. The adults mostly thought this was just a classic case of children getting spooked as the days got shorter and their walks through the neighborhoods of Provincetown got a bit darker. But this all changed when a woman named Maria Costa was walking through the town at night. On this night, a tall figure with glowing blue eyes hopped out of a bush high into the air, dressed in all black, and scared Miss Costa. She ran to get help, but when men from a nearby coffee shop came out, they found nothing. Over the next week, more adult residents were scared by a similar, freakishly tall specter, hopping out of dark corners to give them a fright. Time and time again, this creature would get away from police officers and crowds before anyone but the scared individual could even get a good look at them, hence garnering the name of Black Flash. This cryptid, I suppose, garnered a similar sort of reputation as the legend of Spring-Heeled Jack from the 1800s in England, a creature that could hop off of fences and over gates as well, and would run all over town, seemingly aiming to scare the locals with his glowing eyes and ability to spit fire, though not really much more. Now, as with much other folklore, urban legends tend to be ripe for the picking during times of tension, and around this time World War II was on the horizon, and there were real monsters off the Atlantic coast of America, German submarines, which apparently created the perfect amount of tension for a boogeyman to make its way into the hearts of Provincetown residents. These days, most folks think that the Black Flash, if real, was just a peeping Tom or perhaps a petty thief rather than a cryptid dashing its way across town. At number 5, we have the Green Line Ghosts. Now, nothing makes for a pleasant commute like a ghost sitting next to you on the train, right? If you decide to take the Green Line in Boston, you might be able to experience this pleasantry yourself. Boston's Park Street Station is one of the central subway lines in the city and was opened in September of 1897, connecting just a few stations which ran under the Boston Common and Public Garden. Of course, this first station, being the oldest, has a reputation for holding on to some of Boston's history in the form of hauntings. Among the whines, whistles, and rumbles of trains passing deep underground near Boston, supposedly, you can also sometimes hear wails and moans from spirits of Boston's past. Now, in addition to normal operation, there are at least a few documented tragedies that have occurred on or near the station. In 1897, in the Boylston Street subway station, which is just a few hundred meters from the Park Street station, there was a gas explosion that was supposedly ignited by the combination of a gas leak and a spark from a train car. This prompted a train car to light a flame, ending the lives of 6 people on the train and injuring nearly 100 others. In addition to this tragedy, when the MBTA's Green Line was being built, engineers and construction workers ran into something they weren't expecting underground in Boston: a mass grave holding British casualties from the American Revolution. Supposedly around this site, around 700 British soldiers had been buried, and at one point, as local folklore claims, they were digging the tunnels and they breached a grave and bones began to pour out of the tunnel wall. These days, in the Boston Common, there's a grave marker to mark where they found this mass grave, and riders occasionally, supposedly, experience some of these old folks in the tunnel. There are a few reports made by both riders, but also MBTA trolley drivers, claiming to see men in red coats occupying the tracks between Boylston and Arlington Street. It's claimed that this contributes to some of the unexplained stoppages in Boston's transit system. Thank you all for joining me today on this journey through the Bay State. I'm thrilled to report that while I personally haven't seen any ghosts on the MBTA recently, that it's still chocked full of horrors like you've never seen before, but if I talked about them, I'd probably get demonetized. Not that I make money on here anyways, I guess. However, if you'd like to change that, I'd appreciate it if you liked this video, and if you want to be clued in for more, if you'd subscribe and turn on notifications. If you do, you'll be made aware of the journey through our next state, Michigan, which is quite a wild coincidence because I'm actually moving from Massachusetts to Michigan. I think tomorrow is the date. If you want to help the algorithm pick up my next video, please hand it a like, and if nothing else, next time you're stumbling home after hitting the bars, maybe keep your distance from the Charles River. I wouldn't want you to fall in or get pushed by Mr. Smiley Face. But remember, most importantly, whether you just nearly walked off a cliff towards some lights in the sky or saw a pirate carrying around a chest in downtown Lynn, don't you ever forget, it's always story time.